Welcome to Module 1, where we're going to be talking about energy needs. And when we think about energy, and I'll use that term synonymously with calories, so the calories people need to perform for weight loss, for maintenance, whatever the goal may be. But really, this is where it all starts. At the end of the day, we need to manage calories. We need to look at calories in and calories out. Now, of course, there's different quality to those calories, and we'll talk a lot more about that through the various modules. But let's get started and talk about some of the basics. First of all, when we think about determining energy needs, meeting energy needs or calorie needs can be a challenge. It depends on a lot of factors, the activity level, the gender, the muscle mass, and so many other things. So I'll give you some very, very simple formulas or strategies to help you figure that out for those who you are working with. And when we think about it, calorie deficits put athletes at risk for injury, and also performance can suffer. So we need to make sure we're having athletes fuel their bodies properly. At the end of the day, I always like to describe it as fuel in a car, gas in a car. People understand that analogy. If your car has a full tank of gas, it can go for a long time. If you start to get low on fuel, start to run out of fuel, certainly the car's not going to perform forever. It's going to ultimately die out. Well, that's the same thing with an athlete, with a person. If you don't have the right fuel for the body, the athlete will not be able to perform at their peak, or really just perform at all. It will start to suffer. So think about the athletes who may be on the field for a long time, maybe a long soccer game or a baseball tournament with a doubleheader, or a football game, swimming, whatever the sport may be, it doesn't really matter. But if the athlete is not fueled properly, their performance will suffer. So let's talk about what it takes to help their performance be optimal versus just trying to keep them on the field. We also have to look at for weight loss. Desire for weight loss can also affect intake. A lot of athletes, depending on the sport, may need to lose weight. In fact, that's how I got into the field. I was overweight as a kid, and I played football. When it came to 8th grade, because I always played with the grade above me the years before that, well, when it came to 8th grade, I couldn't play with the kids above me. In fact, I had to lose weight. But it was a balance between getting the calories my body needed to still perform. So the coaches were interested in me as an athlete and wanted me to play, allowed me to play, but I still needed to be in that calorie deficit. And let's be honest, sometimes this might be a partnership with a dietitian or someone else who might be better qualified even than you after working with this course. This gives a great baseline. But then it might take a partnership with somebody else who can work in conjunction with you in the training, and then also go more in depth with the nutrition as well. This is just a nice overview of the nutrition program as a whole. When we think about determining calorie needs, like I had mentioned, it takes a lot of there's various factors. Gender, typically speaking, males have higher calorie needs than females. Of course, that's not always the case, but most of the time. Similarly, height, weight, and then more specific than just weight, body fat versus lean mass plays a big factor as well. Those who have more muscle mass are going to have higher calorie needs than those who have higher levels of body fat. And that might be something you determine, maybe through body calipers or BIA, or there's a lot of various ways to determine body fat, of course. Age can play a big role in terms of calorie needs as well. And then certainly activity level. And I'll get a little bit more in depth in this, but activity level changes pre and post season. It changes depending on the training versus the game day and so on. So we'll talk more about that. But all of those factors play a key role in terms of determining your calorie needs. Now, this is a very, very simplified explanation or general rule of thumb when we think about determining calorie needs. Very, very simplified, and certainly not perfect, but certainly gives a general rule so we can have a baseline of what calorie needs may be. If someone is looking to gain muscle mass, usually a very simple approach is to multiply their body weight times 15. So for example, if you're working with an athlete who weighed 200 pounds, you would multiply 200 pounds times 15, which would put them right around 3,500 calories a day. Again, that is a very simplified approach. Now, maybe they aren't looking to gain muscle mass, but they simply want to maintain their weight. Well, then we could simply multiply their body weight times 12. Again, this is really simplifying it, and there are much more specific ways that you can get in terms of determining calorie needs. But simple approach, this usually is a decent rule of thumb, and then we can build from there and take it from there. Again, maybe in conjunction with a dietitian or a sports dietitian, you can start to look at more specific ways to give very specific calorie needs. But multiplying body weight times 12, again, like I said, to maintain body weight often works well. So going back to that example, someone weighs 200 pounds, you multiply their body weight times 12, so that would give them about 2,400 calories a day on average. And then lastly, if someone is looking to lose fat, you can multiply their body weight times 10. Again, using the example of the 200-pound athlete, multiply that times 10, and that person would get approximately 200 calories a day. Again, very, very general. I can't stress that enough because there's a lot of factors I had just mentioned in the previous slide that determine true calorie needs. But this is a decent baseline to give an idea of where people should be, athletes should be, with their calorie intake. Now, when we look at overall calories and components of calorie expenditure, so we have calorie intake, and that is the foods we eat and the beverages we consume, the beverages with calories, that is. Now, there's a lot of factors that play a role in calorie expenditure, how many calories you expend each day. And you can see this graph here, this chart. The biggest component of that is something called resting metabolic rate. And that is simply, that's the largest component of energy expenditure and accounts for about 60 to 75% of your overall energy expenditure. Now, depending on lean body mass and overall body weight, age, and gender, those factors all play a role in your resting metabolic rate and how many calories you expend each day just being you, just staying alive. Then we have a small piece called the thermic effect of feeding. Now, that varies slightly, but that's only about 10 to 15% of your total energy expenditure. And what do I mean by that, thermic effect of feeding? Well, basically when we eat food, it needs to be digested and assimilated and so on for energy. Well, it requires energy to do that. And certain foods, like protein, for example, require more energy than other foods like fat. So if you had a very, very high protein diet, you would have a higher thermic effect of food than if you ate primarily a big component of your diet as fat. It's not to say that that's the way what I'm recommending, but I'm just giving you an extreme example. So on average, it's about, like I said, 10 to 15% of your total energy expenditure. But even regardless of your overall diet, it's not going to vary tremendously. And then last but not least, you see the red piece of this kind of chart I have here. And you can see it's kind of a jagged line in this chart. Well, it's because physical activity is variable. And it's the most variable component of energy expenditure, contributing up to 30% of your total calories per day that you're expending, because it depends on your training, your type of training. You know, for example, an Ironman triathlete is going to be at a much higher level of energy expenditure than a second baseman, for example, on the baseball field, who does a lot more standing around than continuous physical activity. So depending on the athlete, depending on the activity, that last piece can be variable. So this just gives you an idea. It's a nice, very simplified chart of calorie expenditure as a whole. Now, a couple tips for meeting calorie needs. One, again, first it starts with calculating those calorie needs. And you could use that very simple formula I gave you earlier as a starting ground. Then number two, eating regularly throughout the day. You know, I'm not a proponent of it has to be 6 meals a day or 8 meals a day or any specific number, but athletes usually require more frequent feedings because they have higher needs because of the large amounts of muscle mass and activity and so on. We'll get more into that as we get into the different nutrients specifically. Carry snacks with you. I can't stress this enough, and this is something that you'll see within the course itself, but I always recommend giving specific snack lists, snack ideas to the people you're working with. People want that hands-on, tangible list that they can look at, you know, when they go to the grocery store or when their parents are going to the grocery store for them. What are some smart snacks? What are some smart ideas so I can fuel my body properly? Maybe they're spending most of the time, their day in school, so they may train before school, for example. You know, as a swimmer in high school, I often trained before school and then had school itself. And then even after, we would maybe do land or dry training. So I was training sometimes twice a day. In that case, I would have a lot of snacks with me. I would eat before swimming, I would train, I would then eat again before school, and then have some snacks that led me to lunch, and again, more snacks before the dry training, which was after school. So depending on the athlete you're working with and their needs, this is an important one. And then another thing, I liked that last piece, add milk to meals. If people need more calories, it's an easy way to get more protein, calcium, and so on. I'll talk more about that with specifics, but there's a lot of various tips here for meeting calorie needs. But snacks and, there's specific foods, which we'll talk more about, that actually provide quality sources of calories and nutrients together. And that's an important piece to this. So when someone needs more calories, for example, let's say they're trying to gain weight, that doesn't just mean they should go to fast food every day and eat as many calories as humanly possible. We still need to look at the quality of those calories, getting in the vitamins, the minerals, the nutrients, the protein, and so on, to make sure they're fueling their body with the energy they need, but also the nutrition they need for maximum performance. So last but not least, and I'll go into much more depth about this plate, this is generally how I recommend athletes break up a plate. As you can see, about half the plate is filled with fruits and vegetables. And that list is obviously a short list, not all the fruits and vegetables, but just giving you some examples. About a quarter of the plate is filled with a quality carbohydrate, about a handful. Again, I'll talk more about that in depth when I get to that section. And then also another handful of protein. Again, I'll cover that more when I get into protein itself. But generally speaking, those are some very basic components. And then using this information in conjunction with the manual can give you the basic information you need to better help your athlete. So thanks so much for tuning in. I'll be with you over in Module 2 when we talk about carbohydrates.